It's my great honor to welcome to the Glenbard community, Dr. Michael Thompson.
Linda told me when we were driving over here that she was a little skeptical when she talked to my assistant and learned that I didn't come for part a day. I won't come just to give an evening talk. You got to pay me for a full day and put me in front of a lot of audiences, and that's what I want to do if I'm going to fly from Boston to Chicago, is be as useful as I can. So I've had a really interesting day. And now I'm going to talk to you about best friends, worst enemies, because Linda and I talked, and we decided this topic was so much in the news, especially because of the suicide of that girl in South Hadley who was teased and bullied to a tragic end. And so I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the social dynamics of kids. But I'd like to find out what brought you out, unless you're just the dutiful people who come because the school puts on a speaker and you come. If you came for this topic, what questions could I answer about your child's social life? Well, get 5 people. Just tell me. Yes?
How can I help my son, who is a very sensitive soul, not hold things in when other kids bully him, tease him?
He's how old?
He's 12.
He's 12. Tough time, 12 years old. Yeah. Does he have a friend? Does he have someone who'll stand up for him?
He has a lot of friends.
He has a lot of friends, but he takes things hard. And when you offer him your help, he says, "It's okay, Mom, I'll be fine."
It's okay.
So he wants to tell you a story that drives you completely crazy and makes you feel helpless and in pain, right?
He doesn't want to tell me about it. I have to pull it out.
Oh, and then when you pull it out of him,
Then he says it hurts inside.
all right. Do you have the feeling that he doesn't want it pulled out of him? Or do you...
I have a feeling that he doesn't know what to do about it, that he wants people to like him. He's liked by a lot of people,
Right.
liked by a lot of teachers, but I think he just doesn't know exactly where he fits in.
Okay. Can I ask you one final question?
Sure.
What are your memories of middle school?
I was never in middle school. I sort of hopped around from south side of Chicago to Catholic school for a year in 5th grade, to public school 6th grade, to Catholic school 7th and 8th grade.
So you were always
I
transitioning.
was always transitioning.
Yeah, you were never with an established group. But do you still remember it favorably, or is it a blur?
It's a blur.
Okay. That might be merciful. I'll come back to that. Yes, yes, right here.
I have a daughter who is 10, she's in 4th grade.
Right.
And after 4 sons, so I'm getting into the girl-type relationships. She's very sporty.
Yeah.
So she's having a little bit of a trial. Friendships with girls don't fit. She likes palling around with boys.
Yeah.
The girls are a little bit...
Snippy about
A
that.
little snippy about that.
Yeah.
So just starting to get a feel for what's ahead for her.
Okay.
Here.
Does she have a friend?
She has guy friends, yes.
She has
Backyard
guy
neighborhood
friends. Very much like my daughter. Very much like my daughter. Athlete who preferred the kind of the play of boys, but you pay a price among girls for that. Yes?
My daughter is 15, going on 16, and I'm wondering how much should I know of what is going on in her social life?
Not a lot. But I'm so glad you asked the question. I have a question for you. How much did your mother know about your social life when you were 15, going on 16?
Not that much.
No. What?
There was negligence.
Oh, negligence? That is negligence? Oh, I don't know.
She should have known.
Oh, she should have known. But you were doing everything you could to keep her from knowing. No, I interview about 10,000 middle schoolers. a year in assemblies, and I asked 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, sometimes 9th and 10th graders, do you talk to your mom about your social life? I said, no. Well, a little some. I say, well, tell me, do you? Yeah, I tell her, but I can't tell her everything. Why not? Well, it's private. It's embarrassing. Or I say, you doing anything really wrong? Not really. But if I tell her too much, she'll overreact and she'll call someone. Right, and that's social death. If my mother starts calling people, I am truly cooked. So I can tell her stuff, but I can't tell her stuff that will excite her towards the phone. A couple of others, yes?
I have a 15-year-old son who came with me today. I have an 11-year-old daughter.
Yep.
I also teach middle school.
All right.
So I've had all of the training about
Right.
how to deal with adolescents, but it's a whole lot different at home than it is in the classroom.
Yes, it is.
And I struggle with a child who was very easy, very compliant when he was growing up, to one who's
That
not
was
very
you?
much so much anymore.
He's still reasonably compliant. He came out with you.
He's looking for food.
Brian, what do you get? What do you get for coming? You didn't specify? Okay.
And I worry because my daughter, who is very different, and I know that girls can be more difficult to raise, I worry because she has very low self-esteem. And I worry about the
Right.
exposures that she's going in 6th grade.
She's 11.
And she's
And
11.
we've already heard from a mother of a 12-year-old boy who's worried about how his pain inside. It will be then worth saying that almost all children experience a drop in self-esteem at the beginning of middle school. Carol Gilligan famously talked about girls losing their voice in early adolescence. But those of us who knew the research were a little annoyed because boys also lose their voice. Because the confident young person who's gotten through elementary school and mastered and comes into middle school often involves a change of location. It now involves a whole bunch of kids you don't know. It involves everybody going through puberty. I mean, it's really hard to feel confident when essentially your world is slipping away and you're turning into something you don't exactly have control over. It's a hard time for both boys and girls. And it's a time when they're very hard on each other. You're going to, yes?
What do you do in that same middle school child who never gets that self-esteem back in high school?
Well, that's a kid who never gets self-esteem back is possibly depressed. Or if a kid is doing very well but always saying bad things about herself or himself, that's another, you've got a kid who's doing well and has friends and stuff, but is very self-critical. Often it's a motivational technique. They think that they can motivate themselves to do better by constantly criticizing themselves. Very painful to watch. It's not uncommon, especially pretty gifted kids. If you have a kid who's scraping by, a kid who's doing very well. What? Gifted.
Yeah.
Oh, well, self-critical, you can go to a fine university and talk to the professors. They're all thinking I should be doing more, I'm not good enough, I'm not as good as the people down the hall. It's highly motivating, but it's hard to be with. You know what I mean? It's tough. I mean, it's a style and stuff. And what they need is to fall in love with somebody who says, I love you and you're great the way you are. Give yourself a break. But your mother saying it when you're 15 or 16 doesn't seem to have... yeah, I know. Well, let me give my talk and we'll do questions. Again, I started out also as a middle school teacher. I was a 7th grade homeroom and middle school social studies teacher. And then I realized I wasn't really interested in my curriculum. I also tried teaching high school and I wasn't interested in my curriculum. I was only interested in children's lives and their pain and their family's pain. So I knew I had to be a psychologist. I actually came to the University of Chicago and trained at Michael Reese Hospital, and it was a fantastic hospital on the south side of Chicago. I had some wonderful years in the Chicago area in the 70s. I went back and began teaching at a Harvard teaching hospital, teaching young psychologists and psychiatric residents. And I never imagined I'd go back to the school. I was now trained to work with pretty disturbed children and adolescents, and I thought I was going to stay in a hospital setting. And then my friend Ned Hallowell said, would you come and speak at my school? And I said, what do you mean by your school? And he said, I'm a psychiatric consultant for a private school in Boston. And I walked into school and I thought, I want to be back in school. And I applied for a job at Concord Academy, and I got a job, and then I got a job at a pre-K through 12 school. Just a day a week, and I still had my practice. But I came in thinking that what people would want was my understanding of very troubled kids. And what was interesting to me was that teachers asked me not about, can you tell if this child is crazy? They knew if a child was depressed. Teachers are very good gut diagnosticians. They asked me questions about children's social lives. What do we do with this 5th grade boy who has no friends, who's had no friends for 3 years? What do we do with these 3 7th grade girls who are so powerful that other 7th grade girls are really frightened of them? What do we do about that, Dr. Thompson? I didn't have a clue. What do we do with this 11th grade boy who has a little bit of Asperger's, perseverates, talks too much, is brilliant, but wears everybody down with his long answers in class? And they were very tolerant of him in 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, but now in 11th grade, they've had it to here. They just can't stand him anymore. And they're really hammering it. What do we do about that? And I thought, wow, I didn't get trained. I did not get trained. And I went back and began to read the literature on children's social lives, and I found it quite unsatisfactory. I thought, this isn't good enough, this literature. So it led me to write 2 books that I wrote with a dear friend, Catherine O'Neill Grace, a classroom teacher and later editor of Independent School magazine, and Larry Cohen, a psychologist, who has his own book called Playful Parenting, a wonderful book. So Catherine and Larry and I began to write. And what I wanted to communicate to parents, especially the parents at the 2 independent schools where I was working, where people thought they bought their child a piece of social paradise, you know, because they wrote a large check. The line would lie down to the land, and everything would be roses. And it was not. Kids struggled. Kids struggle socially in school. And what I wanted to try and convey was that there are certain universal truths about school and your social life. And that's what formed the core of Best Friends, Worst Enemies. I go to about 40 schools a year. I just did a 3-week 5-city tour of schools in South Africa. Some state schools and some private schools and some low-fee schools for the poor, low-fee private schools for the poor. If I stand up in front of any school in any country, in any culture, anywhere, I see the same drama in the morning, which is as kids come up to the school, the first thing they do, if they get out of a bus or get out of a car or come around the corner, the first thing they do is look for the eyes of a friend, right? That's why kids come to school. Kids don't come to school because you want them to go to a good college. They don't come to see what's in the curriculum. They get out of bed and get dressed and brush their teeth and go to school because their friends are there. You remember that? That's the only real excuse for a school in the minds of children. And for the vast, overwhelming number of kids, the experience is that there's a friend waiting for them. And Two fifth-grade girls get together and they touch and they talk. And their moms might think they have nothing to talk about. They were in contact last night, they were online together, they were talking on their cell phones together, they were together with each other all weekend. What are they saying? Well, what they're saying is, I'm with you, you're with me. We'll sit through the scary test together, we'll sit through the boring class together, and oh my God, we'll have someone to sit with at lunch. Because that's the scariest time in the school day. Will I have someone to sit at lunch with? Okay? And then there's some kids, a much smaller group of kids, who when they come up to school, they don't pick up their head. And they don't pick up their head because they know very well that nobody's waiting to meet their kids. They don't have a friend in school. So they put their head down and they go in, they go to their locker, and they go to their classroom, and the first person that they talk to in the day is a teacher. Right? Did you do that for a child this week?
Every day.
Every day. Same child every day.
Same group.
Same group. And the teacher, when she does this for a child, asks about a TV show, asks about homework, something, she's providing a friendship, but when she does it, she wishes she didn't have to do it, right? You hope next year I won't have to do this for a child. Maybe she'll have a friend. Maybe he'll have a friend. But she doesn't, and there are a lot of middle school kids who are being kind of pulled through a tough time by a teacher looking out for them in this way. But everyone wants their child to have friends. Americans are particularly crazy about this. There are some more family-centered cultures. But Americans care a lot about their kids' friendships, and we want them. I go to places where parents say, they work hard and they've got their family, that's it. But in the United States, we want our kids to have friends. We want our kids to have friends because we know intuitively the kids do something for each other. It's not just they alleviate each other's loneliness, that's true. You don't want your child to be lonely. But you also want whatever it is the kids do for each other. And Millard Hartop, a great psychologist at the University of Minnesota, spent his entire life, a professional life, studying the social lives of children. He said that children do 5 things for each other that adults don't do, or they do it differently than adults do it. What are they? He said kids teach each other effective communication. They teach one another to modulate aggression. They give one another sexual socialization. They teach each other moral values. And they give one another enhancement of self-worth, so said Hartop. Now that's a little psychobabbling. What do we mean by effective communication? Well, you're kidding, right? We teach kids to speak and to write properly. If you leave it up to them, they teach each other how to say a sentence that has like in it 6 times. Like whatever. All right? But the truth is, I go to that Harvard Square and I want to really bring in kids to the local university there. And they say like all the time. Now I know they can write differently and I know they can speak differently. But they are recognizable to each other because they speak like kids. And kid language is something that kids teach each other. Kids teach each other how to enter a game without disrupting it, how to tell a joke, the timing. Did you teach your kids how to tell a joke? They didn't laugh at your joke. Right? They learned that from other kids. I'm in a boys' school. I'm the supervising psychologist for Belmont Hill School. It's boys grades 7 through 12. And every year, we get a boy who comes in. Maybe he's got 2 professor parents. And he comes in and he's using 3 and 4 syllable words and he sounds like a little adult and I think, oh dear, you don't sound like a kid. It's a social liability to sound like an adult. Well, what am I at the age of 62? How am I going to make you sound like a kid? You should have picked that up. You should have learned that, right? Kids do learn that.
They learn a separate language. But those of you who've got high school students, when a high school student is describing something as really great, they say it is sick. Yes. Others?
Awesome.
Awesome. Sweet.
Fantastic.
Fantastic. Wicked. What? No, that's new to me. Full-on? That's great. So it's constant. I went to one school and they said, we don't say sick here, we say ill. Okay. I went to another school that say dies. Dies for decent. What?
It's
Oh,
beast.
No, but that's different from what I heard. But beast is also...
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah,
all right,
yeah,
thank you.
yeah,
You live and learn. Beast, a 15-year-old tells me beast. Okay? Now look, but we don't use those words. You may, as a parent, have thought, all right, it's been around long enough, I can use it. So with your own children in the kitchen, you said to your 11-year-old, oh, that's really awesome. And your 11-year-old looks at you with pity. Because she realizes you are making a desperate attempt to be cool. And she knows at 11 that no parent is cool anymore. No, after your child turns 10, they know that cool is something given out by peers. That's a peer function. Okay? So that's kids communicating. Modulate aggression. Don't we do that? I mean, if you get any preschool, there's this preschool mantra, use your words, not your hands. Use your words, not your hands. We're teaching them not to be aggressive. Is that true? Yeah, no, actually, the research is that it's kids telling other kids not to be aggressive that's far more powerful. Far more powerful. Don't do that. We don't say that. I had a boy who came into my school in 9th grade, and he was trying to make a social success of himself. And he found out another boy didn't have a dad. He lost his dad, and he started teasing him about not having a dad. Boy, if he kept it up, some boys would have jumped him. They said, you don't tease somebody about not having a dad here. You don't, right? End of story. They checked him right away. I go to elementary schools, and they say, I talk to the teachers, first and second grade teachers, and kids you're worried about socially, always the bossy girl, right? That's Lucy in the Peanuts cartoon, right? The bossy girl. But what I know is that there were 3 girls who started first grade being bossy girls. But 2 of them stopped it because their peers said, we don't like that, that's bossy. They say that, you hear it all the time. And 2 of them can hear it and they stop. And then there's one who charges ahead. Because she's brilliant, she's an only child girl, or her mother is just like this. And it's the model she has. Okay? We see a lot of our social awkwardness played out by our kids. It's painful.
Very.
But what I know is this, I was at a preschool once in Washington, D.C., and they said, you have to see this 4-year-old boy in our pre-K class. He's got this unpredictable, lunging, aggressive style out of nowhere. He can be a danger to other kids. I always try and talk schools out of having me observed for 20 minutes. I learn so much more if I sit and talk with the 2 teachers who spend hundreds of hours with it, rather than my 20 minutes. Besides, the bad boy doesn't usually do the bad thing when there's a bearded stranger in a suit. Bad boys aren't stupid. But they said, you have to see him, you have to see him, you have to see him. I walked into the classroom, I knew who it was before they told me his hair color and his shirt color. Because there was a demilitarized zone around him. He's 4 years old, and all the other kids are staying away from him. The 2 girls who had to sit next to him at snack went over before snack and moved their chairs away to make a bigger space. Okay? Now, it's not like the 4-year-olds had a long conversation about this. They all decided this guy's too scared. And sometimes I talk to the parents of a boy like this, and the father was saying, my son's all boy. He's a hard charger. He's a rugged little guy. And I have to say, actually, no boy in the class wants to play with him. Because he scares them. He's not just a rugged little guy. He's scary. And what I know is that kids who don't get their aggression under control are in trouble. And John Cooey's work at Duke University said that kids who are going to end up being rejected aggressive, as we call them, later, are identifiable by 4 years old. Your 4-year-old has to get their act together, because if they don't, they're in trouble in 8th grade. They're in trouble 9 years later. And we have the evidence for that. If there's a consistent finding in this field, it is that you have to be able to adjust to the norms of aggression that are acceptable. And that is true all the way through school. Anybody who keeps violating those norms is ultimately going to be marginalized and then expunged. It may mean a bully girl in 6th grade may have a reign of terror, but she may be all alone and friendless by 8th grade. I have seen it. I have seen it. Anybody ever seen the cult movie Heathers? Right? How many of you have seen Heathers? What a sophisticated movie. The rest of you, Heathers is one of those movies it's 20 years old. It's about 3 girls named Heather, Heather number 1, Heather number 2, Heather number 3, who dominate the social life of a high school. They're all beautiful and wealthy and cruel. Shannon Doherty is Heather number 1. And the plot of the movie is that Winona Ryder and Christian Slater team up and murder all 3 of them. It's one of the most... If you ever suffered at the hands of a very popular, beautiful girl, this is the movie for you. It's a little tricky. I mean, the movie gets darker and darker and darker. And as once they start killing off the Heathers, there's only one way to go. But it's the first hour is totally fascinating. You want all of the cruelty of middle school and high school to come back to you. This is the movie for you. I said sexual socialization. Kids, I hope we give them sex education and teach them about our values with respect to these things. But kids never come to adults and say, do you think so-and-so's a hottie? And what does it for you? And they don't want to know anything about that. But kids want to know what Simon and Gagnon many years ago described, that kids give each other sexual scripts. Scripting, they script. If you ever went to a movie and had an arm put around you or put your arm around somebody, that had been scripted. Everybody knew what was supposed to happen. Because your peers had told you. That's the way it is. And even though the script now for high school, hooking up, is nobody can figure out what that means, because it's not supposed to be clear what that means. But everybody's talking about the script and what it possibly means. I mean, is hooking up kissing? Is it, is it what we used to call petting? Is it sex? This is the topic of conversation. What is hooking up, and what do people do when they're hooking up? Kids are trying to learn the sexual scripts. They don't talk to us about this. It's not an adult function. Having said that, I then say, and kids teach each other moral values. Don't we take them to church or temple? Don't we teach them right from wrong? And here I come along and say, that one of the peer functions is teaching each other moral values. Well, all you have to do is watch recess. Watch kids at recess. You ever watch kids play Foursquare? What do they talk about when they play Foursquare? The rules. You tried harder to get her out because she isn't your friend, and you didn't try as hard to get her out, and that's not fair, and that's not fair, and that's not fair. Over and over and over, kids and the playground is saying, that's not fair. The way you chose that team is not fair. You have too many good players. That's not fair. The teams aren't even. That's not not fair. So I go to these schools now and they say, oh, the parents are so worried. There's so much conflict at recess. The boys don't play their game. They're all they're doing is arguing about the rules and running the game. And I think in 1936, Jean Piaget, in his monumental work, The Moral Judgment of the Child, said when children are engaged in mixed age free play or free play, the conversation is dominated by rule formation and rule debate. That is normal. That is natural. I've gone to schools where they now want the PE instructors to be running recess to minimize conflict. And I think this is a tragedy. Kids need some time in the day to sort their things out and to play the game. But meanness happens. Yes, of course it does. And you have to have eyes at recess. But I tell you, I'm pretty expensive, and a school in San Francisco, this fancy little school, the parents got so worried about meanness at recess that they put up the money to fly me from Boston to San Francisco to watch recess. I stood there all day and I said, well, that's recess. Give me my check, I'm going home. Right? The most athletic boys ran out and ran the soccer game, and the other boys who weren't as good sometimes joined and sometimes didn't, but then they drifted off in pairs, twos, or threes, and played fantasy games or other things. And the most verbally strong, athletic girls sort of, dominated the jungle gym. Other girls went off and talked with their friends. I'm only worried about the kids who are alone. I'm always worried about the kids who are alone. But I don't think you have to go in and change these games. I mean, I don't think you have to micromanage the social lives of kids. The problem, if you micromanage the social lives of kids, is they don't learn to resolve their own conflicts. I know a school where the teachers felt that kids were just coming to them with every little thing. Every little thing. They wanted everything adjudicated because they were so accustomed to going to their parents. To every little thing settled. So the teachers at this elementary middle school agreed that when kids came up and said, this is so-and-so, did you win it? And they say, well, is this D&D? D&D meant dangerous or destructive. And if the kid says, no, it's not D&D, they said, go back, settle it yourself. Right? They need the skills. Did anybody read David Elkine's piece that was on the editorial page of the New York Times? It said the culture of childhood is dying because children don't engage in free play anymore. They're not passing down rhymes, they're not passing down, skipping rope, eeny, meeny, Sicily, doo-wop, bop, Liberace, I love you, have a beach, remember those? The poems of childhood, the songs of childhood, they're dying. They're dying now. Because kids don't engage in free play. They pass down much of these things. And adults are not a help in this. Okay? And so kids do influence each other morally. They do hold each other morally accountable. They don't always do it. And when there's been a complete collapse of kid morality, the way there was in South Hadley, Massachusetts, and there's a tragedy, our impulse is to all wade in, and to super monitor everything. But as terrible as that was, there are high schools where kids are sorting out things for themselves and their society every day, are they not? And there are kids who show leadership and moral leadership every day. And there are kids who say, that's not fair, that's not right, that's mean. We mustn't judge kids by what the worst occurrence is. We don't judge all human beings by the worst adult human behavior. I don't think it's fair to kids to do that. I understand why we worry, and I'll worry with you. But the parents are going, this school is so mean. I said, no, it's not. Mean things happen. But school is dominated by thousands of cooperative acts every day. We couldn't run schools if kids didn't cooperate. Because there are a lot of bodies in a small space for hours a day. Right? We would get annoyed at other people if we had to sit in class with them all day and listen to them. Okay? And finally I said, Hartup says kids give each other enhancement of self-worth. When my daughter Joanna, she's now 25, but when she was 12, I would tell her that she was a beautiful girl, she was a talented athlete, she's a great artist. I'd tell her all this stuff, and she was glad to have a dad who said that. But I could never have the impact on her that her friend Miranda could have. Joanna would walk in the room and Miranda said, Joanna, where'd you get that jacket? It's so cool. Whoosh. Right? Joanna's self-esteem goes up. We can't do that. We can't do that. No parent can, and that's why it's hard. Because what we need for a child is to have a friend. But in the years from 4th grade to 9th grade, or even 10th grade, which I call psychological middle school, kids are in a period of transition. They're very raw. And they need a friend. But there's also something else going on. When I was writing Best Friends, Worst Enemies, I was searching for the kind of a central thesis in the book. I found a research paper from a very dull, dry research paper. But this psychologist, actually a research methodologist, was saying, we're not getting good results just testing social acceptance, as if it were the only thing going on in kids' lives. There are actually 2 things going on in children's lives at every moment, and they are not the same thing. But kids and adults sometimes think they are. But he said they're not. One is friendship, and the other is popularity. And he said they are not the same phenomenon. And I thought, do kids know that? Do kids know that? So I immediately began going to middle school assemblies, and I've done it a bunch of times in the last 3 weeks. I get 2 or 3 or 4 or 500 kids in an auditorium, and I say, define friendship for me. Give me 8, 10 definitions of friendship. And they say, it's a bond between 2 people. It's someone who likes you for you. Kids in the inner city say it's someone who's got your back. Okay? Someone, as a kid once said, you can do dumb things and your friend still likes you. Oh, that's so important if you're a boy. Okay? A girl said a friend likes the inside of you, doesn't care about the outside of you. Doesn't care if you're cool. A friend is somebody who comforts you. So a friend is somebody you have fun with. Someone that you like to hang out with. One of my favorite definitions, a 4th grade girl said, a friend, like there's never enough time with a friend. Isn't that a lovely experience? Remember that when you were young? You'll always want more time with your friend, but sometimes you had a play date with another kid, and it was kind of endless, and you hoped they'd leave. And you couldn't say why, it's just the time was good. Time didn't go by, but time goes by like that with a friend. By the time kids have defined friendship, I turn to a teacher and I say, how old are you? 55. Did these 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, did these 9th graders, did these 5th graders define friendship for you? Well, yeah. And you can tell the adult's skeptical. I said, well, did they leave anything out? Kids, but if you let them define friendship, define intimacy, affection, reliability, trustworthiness, honesty, loyalty, coming to each other's aid, why do they define friendship? Because children by the age of 4th and 5th grade are actually capable of fully adult friendships. I can prove it. How many of you have a continuous close friendship from before 5th grade? Look around. Look around. That's 35–40% of the people in the room. So whenever I stand up in front of a middle school, I always think I am looking at a lot of lifelong friends. But I once said it to a middle school. I said, you guys are going to be together at each other's 20th, 50th, and 70th birthdays. And the 7th grade boy said, that is totally weird. Because they can't feel that, right? So then I say, what's popularity? Define popularity for me. And the 7th grade boy said, oh, that's if you're cool. I said, well, who decides if you're cool? He said, the kids with style. And I said, well, who picks the kids with style? And he said, well, the popular kids. Right? Right? Kids are always, I was at a girls' school in Toronto, and a girl said, I said, what's popularity? And she said, that's if everybody likes you. And about a third of the girls in the class said, not everybody likes you. She said, well, it's if everybody admires you. About the same third of girls said, not everybody admires you. And the tension went up in the room. I was talking to 700 middle schoolers in Marblehead, Massachusetts. I said, what's popularity? A big 8th grade boy stood up, a guy of much of his growth. He said, that's if you can tease people and they can't really tease you back. Whoa, it's chilly, isn't it? I was down in Texas, San Antonio, Texas, and the 5th grade girl said, I said, what's popularity? And she said, oh, that's if you're nice. Unless, of course, you're mean. And I said, I don't get it. She said, there's nice popular, there's mean popular. Well, you better believe there is. When girls start to define it, they get into it, and there's always a power element. I was at Barack Obama's old school, Punahou, in Hawaii, in Honolulu. I said to the middle school, what's popularity? And the boy said, that's the food chain. And my other kids say, it's a ladder, it's a status ladder. Sophisticated kids say, it's a status hierarchy. What the hell? We don't want our children to rank, do we? But they are. They all are, we all were. If I got your 7th grade class picture, you could give me the rank order of every kid in terms of popularity, at least top third, middle third, bottom third, in terms of popularity. And what makes you popular? What is it, number one for girls? Looks. Clothes. Attitude, confidence, I call it charisma. There are some kids who just are charismatic with other kids. For boys, sports ability, number 2. Humor is number 3. This is a tough one. It's height and build. Taller boys get more leadership opportunities than any short boy can tell you. Hard to get noticed, and then you try and get noticed, and they say he's trying to get noticed because he's short. Short boys will tell you. It's hard. This is a lot of this is biological. I was a very bad athlete in middle school. I don't have great hand-eye coordination. And team sports made me incredibly anxious because I knew I was going to screw up. I'd never get the basketball in the hoop when I was, I just didn't want, I was so anxious. And the boys in my class loved baseball, which I thought was incredibly dangerous. Because they throw a very hard ball at your face. And I was never sure I was going to get my mitt up to protect, or they send you out to get a hit. But I could tell jokes, I could tell dirty jokes, I could clown around, I could entertain, and that's what I did. I mean, I left it all behind me years ago. Right? To be sure. You do what you can, okay? But every kid knows the rules. But John Cooey and Ken Dodge at Duke went to hundreds of classrooms, and they measured for popularity, and they found the top 15% of kids are very popular. Next 45% of kids are accepted. Okay? Next 20% of kids are called average or unclassifiable. What does that mean? It means your classmates don't say you're popular, but they don't say you're unpopular. They don't classify you. They leave you be. And that's 15 and 45 and 20. That's 80% of kids. And they are all right because they're almost certainly friend eligible. And if you have a friend, you are going to be all right. If you're a 7th grade girl and the girls tease you about what you're wearing, you go to your friend and she says, don't pay any attention. They're so stuck up. They think they're so good. And then she uses the magic B word. And you think, that is really true. Right? And you are healed. Not because your mother comforts you at the end of the day, though that's helpful. That's not a bad thing. But you really need someone who bandages your wounds right then. And that's a friend. That's why I was asked if your child has a friend. Somebody they can go stand. We know that kids are getting teased. The teasing will die down if they go stand with a friend. We know if they go stand with the class social worker, or the class social worker runs over to aid them, the teasing increases. Right? So it actually has to be a genuine friend. So I'm worried about the kids who may be friend ineligible. 5% band of kids are called in the literature neglected. I prefer overlooked. Very brilliant, very shy, very introverted, very quiet, often very close to their families, super good students. Okay? But they can't project out socially. But usually by the end of elementary school, those kids have a friend. Maybe a friend. And moms, if you wish for something different for your child, you just be grateful. I've had mothers come up to me and say, my daughter only has one friend. And I said, well, tell me, when you were her age, did you have lots of friends? Oh, yes, I had a big group. I said, well, you don't get a child with your social style. Actually, the child has to find his or her social style. Because I've also had parents come up and say, you know, my son doesn't have a best friend. He just hangs around with 5 or 6 guys all the time. I say, fine. Right? What I know is, there's research on the average number of friends that elementary, middle school kids have, and the range is from 1 to 10. I don't want to tell you this because I've seen so many parents go, and the average is 5. But there are kids, some kids invest everything in one friend. It's a one friend deal, and it can be, it's tricky. You know, because 2 second grade girls, one wants only the 2 of them to be friends forever, and the other wants to start seeing other people. It's very painful. It's painful. And there's not a lot the moms can do about it because you can't dictate the terms of your kids' friendships. Friendship is like love. We can't dictate it. We can dictate respect and tolerance and inclusiveness, but we can't force kids to be friends. Children tell me that all the time. Gregory, I'm worried about the bottom 15%. Because once my neglected or overlooked kids have a friend, I'm left with controversial and rejected kids. Controversial kids have annoying habits. They have hygiene problems. I was asking a school in California, what would make you unpopular? What would make you controversial? And the girl said, I think it was a 5th grade girl said, if you pick your nose and eat your boogers. And I thought, that will really do it. Nobody wants to sit next to that child. But a kid with a hygiene problem, a kid who's impulsive, who says too much, and the teacher giving out homework, 9th grade, she's giving out homework on the Monday, and everybody instantly realizes that she gave the same homework Thursday night. It's a confused middle-aged person. If we just keep quiet, no homework, we'll tell her tomorrow. And then the verbally impulsive voice, but Miss Jones, you gave us this. Kill the kid. Poor sports, short fuse. Kids, these are controversial kids. They need to be coached, not criticized. They need to have their repertoire, their social repertoire, amplified. But it requires teachers not criticizing them when doing things wrong, but noticing when they just have a perfectly splendid day. When the bossy girl, in fact, lets everybody has a turn and just takes her turn, and then you go over and say, you know, Julia, everybody loved being with you today, because you let, really? Because you just had just an ordinary day. And for you, that's unusual. The kids who are most at risk are the rejected kids. Rejected aggressive and rejected submissive. Rejected aggressive are kids who can't control their aggression. They usually come from families with conflict and strife or mental illness, and the kids may themselves be fighting with some mental illness. But it manifests itself as anger and aggression towards other kids. You get boys who are hit around by their fathers at home, and they're obedient at home, and then they come in there and they take it out on other kids. And you get rejected, submissive kids, thin-skinned, super sensitive. And they get their feelings hurt, and then they withdraw. Now, I'm worried about the bottom 15%, because the research worldwide is that 15% of kids are traumatized by what happens to them socially in school. So I'm always working with teachers to identify kids like that, to get them to therapists if they're depressed, to get them to social skills groups if they need help in controlling their aggression. I need counselors to be running friendship groups. I really need that. That's what I want middle school and high school counselors to be doing. I know that it gets better for most high schoolers after 10th grade, right? After 10th grade, the middle school popularity thing is everybody's tired of it. It's only the Heathers who want to keep it going, right? They were so fabulously popular in middle school, they think they can keep it going through high school. That's why I don't know what this high school does, but I have to tell you, I don't like homecoming queens and the captain of the football team escorting in the most beautiful. I don't like the adult sanctioning of that kind of middle school popularity stuff. I don't like it. But kids mostly outgrow it anyway. But there are kids who are now pretty isolated. And they may not have somebody, and I'm worried for them. I want them to have a church youth group. I want them to have scouts. I want them to have summer camp. I want them to have something. My nephew was pretty isolated for his middle school years. And his vacations with my family, with his cousins kind of filled in and were friends to him. He was painfully shy and he'd withdrawn. And then it turned out he was a good ice hockey goalie. And he started playing on a team and he had friends. And then his mom got him glasses and he could actually see the puck. He turned out to be really quite good after that. And that formed his friendship group. You can come back from it. You can come back from being isolated. But kids who are isolated year after year, of course their experience in school is very painful. Very painful. And I'm worried about that. And I'm worried if a mob runs away in high school, because the adults can't monitor high school as well. And I had a discussion with 5 principals last Friday about the South Hadley thing. It must send tremors through you, doesn't it? That it could happen. And that did the adults have the information they needed to act and not act, or did they not really have the information? Is it a place you don't want to go with high schoolers? Had the new girl slept with the big athlete and incurred the ire of his girlfriend, who then organized the mob against the girl? It's what it sounds like to me. It's what the emails read like. And it took on a power of its own, and the girl took her life. Awful. Desperately bad. But what I know is this. When I was growing up in the 50s, teachers let kids just go at each other. They didn't get involved much. Schools take more responsibility than they ever had. They ever did. And I can tell you the reason why. It actually all goes back to a Swedish psychologist in 1982. Or actually it started in Norway in 1982. In Norway in 1982, it's a very small country, 4 million people, very socially progressive. And in 3 separate schools, 8th grade boys killed themselves. Boys who didn't know each other, leaving notes leaving notes saying that they couldn't stand to be teased and bullied every day. And what is the number one insult, boy on boy insult in 8th grade and 9th grade? What? Gay? Fat? Yes.
Gay is the big one.
Gay, faggot, wimp, wuss. And if you're an 8th grade boy and you hear that day after day and day after day and day after, what? Pansy. Yeah, anything that's an attack, a boy attack on masculinity. And girls, they don't attack directly, but they go behind the back of another girl and they refer to what? Thank you. I have a book on my shelf, the title of which is Slut, about biopsychologists studying the impact on girls who are isolated and girls go after each other in quite vicious ways about sexual behavior and attacks on their supposed or alleged promiscuity. Is this something adults want to get into? Not really, is it? The kids are having sex. And what's the adult role? Do we tell parents what? Because what kids are talking about. Because high school kids are tracking what each other are doing. That's what the whole hookup culture is. You say, I hooked up, but what does that mean? What do you actually do? We need to talk. Or we need to talk about you. Right? And if that talk gets destructive and painful and speculative, and that's pretty scary. And it's very tough for adults to sort that out. Now, what can communities do? Schools and teachers must have an ethos against excluding and bullying. They have to have words that they use over and over. Respect, responsibility. I don't care what the words are. Compassion. I just need to have a couple of words. I was at the lab school at UCLA in Los Angeles, and I had the elementary school, and a girl said, what should we say if we see somebody being bullied? And I said, you should say, we don't do that here. She said, we say that! As if it was a kind of a copyright phrase. Yeah, we don't do that. We don't do that here. But what I know from O'Connell, Pepler, and Craig, who, at York University in Ontario, they put cameras in school, and they filmed, and they found there was a significant bullying incident in elementary school recess every 8 minutes. And 51% of kids just stand and watch it silently and lend support to the bully. 24% of kids join in and imitate the bully. Yeah, he is a fag. And girls do that too, to middle school boys. Middle school boys being called gay, and they say, yeah, he really is kind of gay. Girls will jump in. 25% of kids will try and stop an incident and say something. It's a very brave thing to do. None of us stand up against the lynch mob. It's the most courageous thing that a human being can do, to stand up against a mob that's going after somebody. That's why Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird is one of the great American heroes, because he actually does stand up against the lynch mob. But it's a hard thing for human beings to do. And we need to give kids a transcendent mission that goes beyond cool. The mission of schools is always, of course, learning, but that's not so compelling, and besides it involves ranking on our part. We say we don't like the way these kids do a status ranking, but we're doing it all the time, right? We're grading and ranking, giving prizes to the top and not to the bottom. I mean, we're modeling a behavior which we must model, but it's still, we're modeling. Ranking, we do it all the time in school. So kids rise to their best when there's a transcendent mission. Schools across the United States after 9/11, what the kids did was just magnificent. Money they raised for families of New York, firemen and policemen. I mean, when kids have a mission that's bigger than cool, you see a different thing. I was an outward bound instructor, and we would take kids, rich and poor, white and black, came up to Hurricane Island. The first day, we put 12 of them in a whaling dory and tow them 5 miles out to sea and give them oars and say, row back later. And I tell you, that pulls a group together. They literally have to put an oar in and get and learn how to pull together. To pull together. How a group pulls together. And it's a tremendous bonding. Because whether you're from a fancy suburban high school or any inner city school, whether you have parents with money or you have a struggling single mom, if you are up against a common enemy like the ocean, you've got to learn to pull together. And that's why why I so believe in things like camp and Outward Bound and experiences which take kids out of their usual social context and throws them into challenging situations. Because they transcend the rules of cool and fashion and who's a good athlete. There was a boy in my group when I was a student in Outward Bound, who was a little guy. He probably just embarked on puberty at 11th grade, just really hard on a boy's popularity, to be a late developer like that. And we had football, you know, we had some big boys in our group. And this guy turned out to be the only boy in the boat who knew how to navigate. His parents had a sailboat. He knew how to navigate. But we were out in the fog and the dark, and we were terrified. I mean, we were terrified that we'd all start to row towards Europe and nobody ever find us. I mean, it was a risk. And this kid could navigate. And the last week of the month I was in Outward Bound, we elected him our captain, because he had a talent we needed to save us. And what I want in schools is for every kid to get a chance to be showcased somewhere, to have a leadership shot somewhere, because that would then give it. Now, this boy, you could tell when he came on the island, looked like a beaten dog, a rejected, submissive kid. But he walked off the island, you know, with his shoulders back and his head up. I mean, that's what I want to see. It's why I believe in those kinds of things. But I've said my say, and it's kept life.